Good morning. It's good to see you all. I hope you're doing well. And if you're not doing well, we're studying a book that you can really relate to. It paints life pretty accurately and then gives us hope. So it's a good book for anybody who may be here this morning and not at their best. We hope that this study will help, as it certainly can. It's helped me quite a bit. It's funny, when I was in middle school, I went to the library and found a book called The Anatomy of Melancholy. And it was a fascinating book. I didn't read it all, but it was like, wow, I didn't know people could be so melancholy. And then I realized later that was me. So, but that's the beauty of Ecclesiastes. It can be quite that way, but it lifts our spirits. It gives us hope, and at least that's the effect on me, and I think it can be on you as well. We're going to start with a word of prayer, and I asked Wally if he would lead us, please.
Our loving Father, as we open your word and read from the passages that you have left for us, help us to be encouraged. Help us to see what is written there with a mind's eye towards eternity with you, not to be brought into a place where we might be discouraged because of the things that go on in this life, but to always keep a view of heaven and the promises that you've made to us about what is to come. Please help Dennis as he leads the discussion this morning, and help us as we try to take into our hearts those things that you put there for us to grow from and understand more about you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. In a moment, I'm going to have some people read some scriptures. I wrote down all the names except one. And so let's see here. I've got Ron Bird and Stephen Doty. Who has 3:19 to 20? Jack. Very good. Thank you. And so I just happened to pick people that were in the audience early. So if you weren't selected, it's no reflection on ability. Time and chance happens to us all. Of course, you may think, well, that's a good thing I wasn't here. I'm glad I don't have to do any reading. All right. Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. We're in chapter 10. And that'll be tonight or today and Wednesday night. So what advantage does man have? Where is that question first asked in the book? Does anybody remember by any chance? Yes, thank you. Yeah. And I believe, and you may not agree with me on this, but I do believe that is the main question that the book asks and we must answer. And that's really what the connection is and keeps this book going in a certain direction. Because there are times when we're thinking, well, wait a minute, didn't we cover this already? And, well, wait a minute, what's that got to do with Solomon, or if he is the author? So we're going to make a connection to chapter 10, chapter 1, verse 3. But first, before we do that, let's look at the connection of the book so far. And this was part of the lesson sheet. And by the way, I don't bring lesson sheets to the class. And if you're visiting with us, please don't feel like you've missed out on something. The idea is it's a way to prepare for class. I don't really follow the lesson sheet closely, so you don't really need it for the class. Although this exercise might be kind of nice, but you can do well without it. Nevertheless, this is from the lesson sheet. What I'm going to do is connect passages from the book of Ecclesiastes in the first 9 chapters with the main themes of the book. Now, these themes emerge, and we've seen them. We've seen, this verse is come up again, and it's come up again, and this whole section has come up again. And so we identify these as themes, and they really stand out, and we should really pay close attention to those themes because the author is trying to tell us something. And I believe that these came up in the effort to answer the question, what advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Is there any advantage, or is it just something that we kind of evolved from and picked up along the way as part of our human wisdom? Or does it go beyond that? So, we're going to start off with chapter 7, verse 15. So I'm going to have Ron read that, and then you think about, well, which theme does that relate to? All right? So in other words, which theme or topic are we going to put the letter A next to? Some of you have already done this exercise and probably have the right answers. But anyway, Ron?
In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, a righteous man perishing in his righteousness, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness.
All right, thank you. You know, that could possibly relate to two themes, but what theme comes to mind as you were listening to Ron about meaninglessness and inequity and really trying to figure out patterns of the way things ought to be? Anybody have a theme? Yes, Grant.
With life's inconsistency.
That's right. You have done well, my son. Sorry, I didn't mean to say son. My friend. Life's inconsistency. One of the reasons why we feel sometimes like there's no real meaning is because it's inconsistent. Just when we think we have it figured out, a curveball is thrown. And something comes at us from left field. And I won't use any more baseball analogies. I just did that for Adam's benefit. All right. Let's take a look at chapter 3, verse 11. Stephen Doty.
He has made everything appropriate in his time. He has also set eternity into their heart, so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end.
All right. Again, there could be a couple of themes that connects to, but what did you come up with on that one? Eric? The last one? Yeah. No, not that it couldn't go somewhere else, right? I mean, maybe that relates to the futility of life. I can't figure it out. It's futile. It's hopeless. It's vain. But it really emphasizes, among other things, that God is in control. And so, by the way, there are other passages there that really bring it out. The third chapter, verse 14, etc., these all bring out God is in control. All right, very good. So now we're going to go to 3:19 and 20. Jack?
For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to the dust all return.
All right. You know, I thought we were created in God's image. How come we're not any better than the beast? Well, when it comes to our ultimate fate, there is no difference. What does that relate to?
Futility of life.
That's right. That's right. Futility of life. And, you know, there are several things that point out the futility of life. After all, that is one of the most common phrases in the book, over and over again. Futility, vanity, every chapter seemingly will have it in there a couple of times. And certainly that passage brings that out. Okay, let's move on here. And Jerry, would you read your verses, please?
Chapter 4, verse 4.
Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. And chapter 4, verse 6. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind.
All right, very good. What theme does that relate to? What's that?
Labor can be futile.
That's right. Now we notice up here also, labor can be a blessing, but there are certain verses, like those two in particular, that point out that labor can be vain. It can be futile. So what type of labor are we engaging in? And that's the question that we have to answer. What advantage does man have in all his toil under the sun, which he does under the sun? And boy, I tell you, you can quickly get off in the wrong direction. Because there is a toil, there is a labor that goes in the wrong direction. It's easy to fall into it. I don't know about you, but I have fallen into it. I used to teach a time management class, and I would tell folks that you gotta put the ladder on the right wall. Some of you know what that metaphor means in regard to time management. And I got to tell you, I just told them, I said, you know what? I've wasted about 7 years of my life with the ladder on the wrong wall. And I hope God will forgive me. I'm sure he will, because I asked him to. But, that's the way life is sometimes. You've got that ladder on the wrong wall. You're approaching your labor and your toil and all the work that you do in the wrong way. And so the book of Ecclesiastes helps us to prioritize, which is the central tool in all of time management. All right, Steve Dickey.
Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of the oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead were fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun.
Thank you. Well, that was kind of a softball. So if you want a softball, go ahead and raise your hand. What's that, Roy? Oh, okay. Oh, now nobody wants to answer. Well, you said it's a softball. I find this a softball. Janet?
I'm going to say injustice and oppression.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Certainly, it could relate to some others here, but since there were only 2 left, that seems to be the better of the 2. So you've chosen well. Okay, and then our final passage, 5:18 through 20, Mike McCollum.
Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart.
All right. If you haven't answered one yet, here's your big chance. Yes, Tim.
Fairly confident it is F.
Okay, I had to think about that for a minute. Yes, it is F. And that is, labor can be a blessing. It can be, but we must apply wisdom. And that's a lot of what chapter 10 is about. So let's turn on over to the 10th chapter of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to start off here in a moment with verses 1 through 3. If there was a central theme of the 10th chapter, it's wisdom versus foolishness. And with wisdom, we have the ability to really adequately answer the question, what advantage does man have in all his labor, which he does under the sun? But foolishness, we're going to talk about the fool. I hope I'm never called a fool, but I have been foolish. I hope I'm not called a liar, but I have lied. We sin. Hopefully that does not characterize us or define us. I strive for wisdom. I don't always act with wisdom. Nevertheless, this is what we're trying to do in the 10th chapter, to still answer that ultimate question. What advantage do we have? And so we'll gain some more insight here as we get into the 10th chapter. All right, let's take a look at verses 1 through 3. Now, I'm reading from the New American Standard, which could be a bit different than yours, but do the best you can to follow along, please. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink, so a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. So in these 3 verses, we have several observations about wisdom and foolishness. They aren't the only verses in the chapter. That we can make some other observations, but that's what I believe ties these first 3 verses together. Someone might say, well, what about verse 4? Matter of fact, the New American Standard puts verse 4 with verses 1 through 3, but I just feel that verse 4 goes better with 5, 6, and 7, and you're certainly welcome to give a different perspective on that. So we're gonna take a look at verses 1 through 3. One of the observations is that a little foolishness can be weightier than wisdom. Now, when you take a look at verse 1, a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom. If something is weightier, then you would say, well, that must be better. But please note that just because something is weightier or has extreme adverse effects or has a strength doesn't mean that it is better. All right? And I would suggest that that's the case with foolishness. It is not better than wisdom. This doesn't make it better. One of the reasons I put in the lesson sheet, and we're not going to go through that now, and we may not even go through it Wednesday night, but if we have time, we'll go through it Wednesday night. But I asked you to perform a Franklin analysis. Now, Franklin analysis is when you just simply take a look at something, what are the negatives and what are the positives, right? And it's obvious from the study of wisdom literature that we favor wisdom, and we know that that is the way to go. But can you make that case, especially in verse 1, when right off the bat, it's weightier, it's heavier. And so perhaps in some way it is better. But I'd like to suggest it isn't. And I think one of the things, and this is one of my favorite things, is to bring out an example. Sometimes I don't understand a concept. I don't understand an idea. And I'm thinking, this could go a couple of different ways. What exactly is it talking about? And then somebody gives me an example, and it really begins to take on more meaning and clarity. But Ed, you were going to comment about something.
Yeah, this pivots from the last verse of the previous chapter, where it talks about one sinner destroying much good. And so if you think of that, the weightier in that context, it's better to be wise, it's better to not sin. But on the other hand, if you're going to be trying to do what's right, it's important to remember sometimes one person who's interested in violating things and destroying things and does things that do that actually can outweigh all the good things you did. And it fits with a lot of stuff we saw in chapter 9. The poor guy who saves the city, everybody forgets him. And so there's going back to your theme that you talked about a lot, this balance of realizing it is important to be wise, but it's also important to understand in wisdom something about foolishness. That foolishness is in itself a pretty powerful thing. And I guess getting to kind of practical American, wisdom on that, it's important to try not to make mistakes. it's important that you can sometimes do well. If you make a few mistakes, it'll be okay. But often, just make one mistake and you're dead. And that's true a good percentage of the time. And I think if we remember that sinner means a person who's failing. The primary picture in the Old and New Testament is missing a target. Now, it's not just chalk marks on a chalkboard that God doesn't like this. God doesn't like it because it messes everything up. And so that this idea of being a fool has a moral component. It's not just that you can't think well or that you didn't get good grades in school. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with not actually committing yourself to pleasing God. And when you do that, one guy doing that can really mess up the work of a whole congregation who've been trying to do things. Now, can God make lemonade out of lemons? Yeah, he does it all the time. But it's important to remember when everything falls apart because of something one person did. Yeah, that's something you can expect sometimes.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Yet, mostly what I'm thinking here is my own foolishness, right? I mean, you've got a life that overall reflects some wisdom, and yet I may, not maybe because of intention, but inadvertently, a moment of weakness, a moment of foolishness, I can do a lot of damage. You know, it's interesting. Matter of fact, I'd like Adam Rico, if he wouldn't mind, to explain this. He didn't have to. I don't want to put him under pressure, although I already have. But the idea of the piggy bank, and the piggy bank is full of coins. All right, and Adam, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but I think you do because we've talked about this before. Do you want to talk about it or not?
Give me a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I just thought the reason why I wanted you is because I thought that I'm going to give you a little more, but I thought you could explain it better. But anyway, you know, we do wise things. And it's like putting a coin in a piggy bank. We do good things, and we're putting coins in the piggy bank. Not that that's earning salvation. Don't get me wrong on the metaphor, all right? But the analogy here is that, you know, pretty soon, over time, that piggy bank can be full of good things. And then you take that thing and you shake it upside down and coins fall out, and that may represent the times when we do something that is counterproductive, counter to what has gone into that bank. And does that help at all? I think I did. Yeah, I didn't want to, but did you have anything that you want to add to that? Because we've talked about this before.
No, I think
Okay, but you know, I could be confusing Adam with somebody else in the class. So who else knows about the piggy bank and wants to maybe add something to it or maybe clarify something? By the way, that is a general example, but who has a biblical or personal example of how a little foolishness, whether it was overt sin or not, really messed things up like the fly messes up the ointment? Yes, please.
Just think of Solomon and his own son. Solomon spent his entire life building this empire with the wisdom God had given him. Rehoboam split it apart through the providence of God, but split it apart with his own foolishness in a single speech.
Yes, you know, what's interesting too about that is that it's not that young men are always foolish, but it is interesting that he did try to gain some insight, and they advised him poorly, and he took their advice. And so, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that example, Roy.
I think Ananias and Sapphira in chapter 5 of the book of Acts, they made a decision that cost them their lives.
Yeah. Going back to what Ed was saying, I mean, you know, a bad decision, a little bit of foolishness can actually cause you to lose your life. You've built your life, you've built your reputation, and in a moment, your life is gone, or your reputation in a moment is gone. David?
When I was thinking about your piggy bank analogy, I was actually thinking as you're filling it up, and the foolish act is you take a hammer, because you lose all credibility on one simple act a lot of times. And you see this a lot in pop culture or politics. Someone is doing a lot of good things. The one that came to mind was Will Smith was usually considered someone who was a talented actor. A lot of people liked him. And then he slapped that guy on TV, and instantly everybody hated him. Or like the Dixie Chicks were a great country band, and then they badmouthed the president, and they were immediately canceled.
Yeah.
And those are just two silly examples of pop culture, but that type of thing, I always try to emphasize with the boys. Your reputation is like that. You can do all these good things, and all it takes is one stupid thing, and now everybody goes, oh, that guy's a bozo.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Sometimes it does break the bank. I hope that, you never do something that breaks the bank. I know that typically what will happen is that, you're shaking some of the coins out. That hurts your reputation or your credibility with others. And hopefully it'll never get to the point where it all spills all over. You have an example?
What I was thinking is it's important, I think, to change away from reputation, because one of the main themes of Ecclesiastes is that your reputation is something that other people control, and therefore it's not something you ever control. And so he keeps coming back to that. It's more important to look at actual doing good things or character in that let's say you're trying to build a building, and Red Agey's been building this barn, and they put in the wrong kind of nuts. So then they had to come and they had to split the forms that went down into the concrete and do a lot of different screwball things because of one mistake. Mm-hmm. Okay? In my opinion, that's really the power of this section of Ecclesiastes. It's not talking about reputation. He's already said you can't control it. It's talking about real life. That you can do a whole lot of things, and you get this whole thing together, and bang, you make one mistake, and now everything is undone, and you got to start all over from scratch. And that happens frequently, like I say, with Brent's barn. Now, you're solving the problem, okay? But it's a whole lot of work.
Here's an example I was thinking. And I don't know how many of you can relate to this, but you remember when Moses, what did he do? He struck the rock instead of speaking to it. Numbers, where is that? Numbers 18 or something like that. I actually wrote it down here somewhere. But anyway, but it's in the book of Numbers. And what did that cost him? Right, he didn't get to enter into the promised land. So, there are consequences, weightier consequences. All right. Let's take a look at verse 2 here. A wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. Now, there is a biblical significance of being on the right. All right, or something that is to your right. And these are passages that support that idea. I'm not sure that's what's at play here. Perhaps it is. Maybe it's not. After all, Solomon's father wrote of that in Psalm 16, Psalm 110. I don't remember if he wrote Psalm 110. But anyway, it is there in the Psalms. And also Matthew 25, the judgment scene. And Acts 7, Stephen's martyrdom. And so that may have some significance here. I don't really want to debate that too much. You could probably make a case either way. I would say at least this, though. There is a different or opposite direction. All right? And it is clear when you're going the wrong direction. As a wise person, and I would say everybody in this room is wise, to one degree or the other. And you know when you're going the wrong direction. You know when you're going to the left and you're no longer going to the right. And so this comes out in verse 3. How obvious is it that you're going to the left instead of to the right? Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. It is apparent, maybe not to the fool, but it is to the discerning, to the wise it is. What does a fool do that says or demonstrates he is a fool? Could be a lot of things here, folks, and you probably can't get a wrong answer. I don't think you can, but let's just throw out some things. Don't raise your hand. Just quickly just shout out some things.
Speak at the wrong time.
Speaking at the wrong time. Speaking too many words. speaking too many words at the wrong time. What else?
Oftentimes just the fool, I want to say, is sinful in his actions. He's unkind. He's unpleasant. He's mean. Things that don't get him anywhere. Don't get him where he ought to go.
Very good.
Those that are foolish really don't even understand oftentimes when they are foolish. In other words, it's a blind spot for them. And they don't even really see it. And so they basically, go down this path of foolishness because they haven't even really looked at examined what is right. And many times they just don't care. And they don't even see all the, shall we say, carthage behind them. They just continue to go along.
Think about, oh yes, Jack.
Somebody who does something without any thought as to consequences afterwards. They just rush into it and they have no planning or thought as to what can happen or what should happen.
Are you saying the Apostle Peter is a fool?
I'm not saying you are.
No, I know. Totally teasing. But didn't that sound a little bit like Peter? Peter was not a fool, but did he do some foolish things? Yes, and that's one of the beautiful things about Peter. He's real. We can really relate to him. And yet his overall demeanor was toward wisdom, because he said one of the wisest things in all of Jesus' ministry in Matthew the 16th chapter. Jerry?
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, and there's foolishness in the general sense of not thinking about consequences, but going back to Ed's comment earlier about there being a moral component to the type of foolishness that's talked about here, it's not as much just not thinking about the consequences. It's having a disregard for what God thinks about our actions or what we're doing. The disregard for, does God care about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say something that's more generic than what Jerry said, and that is just, in general, I find that people who have a disregard for authority or don't respect authority tend to be foolish, and obviously God's the ultimate authority.
Right. That whole mental outlook is going to easily, you're going to easily fall into that. Yes?
Acting unwisely is obvious in due course. But one of the things that affects us is inaction. That you refuse to do what's good and right and positive, that has long-term implications, but won't move.
Right.
Sit on dead center and look at it and leave it.
Norm, I'm glad you brought that up. It's kind of the opposite of impulsiveness and, knee-jerk reaction and jumping in without really thinking about it. But that is the other end of things, is that inaction, not doing things, is foolish when we know that we need to do them. Roy?
Marty used to say, fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Yeah. That's a classic saying. I think it ended up in one of Elvis Presley's songs too. Not that has anything to do with anything, but I do want to say this. I thought I had one more point there. I wanted to wrap up this idea of what is obvious, and you know when you're hanging out with a fool. Matter of fact, when you know you're hanging out with a fool, there's collateral damage. We've probably experienced this, hanging out with the wrong crowd, wrong person, and at the wrong time, and all of a sudden, I wish I'd gone to the right instead of the left. And so there are a lot of things that are obvious about the way the fool acts, and it is more obvious to us. And what's interesting is it's not always obvious to rulers. Even rulers, as wise as they purportedly are, fall into foolishness. And that's what we're going to take a look at here in verses 4 through 7. We have some observations about rulers. Let's pick up in verse 4. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. So the first observation is calmness when in conflict. We know this is a good idea anytime. Anytime you're in conflict, it's a good idea to remain calm. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. It's especially true when it comes to a ruler. And it's especially true when it comes to an ancient Near Eastern ruler, because they ruled with complete authority. Nobody really questioned them. What may be inferred if we abandon our responsibility? And the reason I ask that question is, if you look at verse 4, do not abandon your position. What does your version say?
Do not leave your place.
Do not leave your place. Some say post. When I first read this verse years ago, I thought, stay firm to your position. You have made a mistake and insist on being right with the ruler. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's similar to the idea of 8th chapter, verse 3. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. So you're talking about the king and the need to keep the commandment because he took an oath before God, but do not be in a hurry to leave him. And I think that, although it's not exactly the meaning, but it is related, you may be tempted because of the ruler's temper to exit your post, to exit your responsibility. And why is that then wise, that when it says composure allays great offenses? Yeah, Adam?
I don't know where you're going, but it could be, if you leave your post, you've kind of made the decision for the ruler, right? That this was a fatal blow to your relationship, or a fatal blow to your position, and it's over. Versus, it might have just been a temporary anger, or it passes, and you can keep your job or keep your post.
Yeah, it could have been out of fear. It could have been out of pride. Any number of things cause you to run, to abandon your post. But you need to stay there. And this would be taking responsibility, being accountable for it. It is fearful. I can't say that I would have lived according to these words back in the day of the Occidental kings, particularly of Babylon, right? Yeah, Tim?
We're asking what things foolish people do that show them foolish, and then I thought of it again here. It's the idea of instant gratification, so that if you find that the ruler's mad at you, you think purely in that moment, I need to save myself, and split. And you probably make yourself look a bit guilty as well. But because you're just trying to save your own skin in that moment, and you don't think at all or take that moment to breathe, you've abandoned whatever people you were with or helping or working for or protecting, whatever your place was. You put them in some moment of jeopardy. Whereas if you take a moment, breathe, relax, don't think just about yourself, about the situation, about everything that's going on, that will be much more wise than that instant, I'm going to take off.
Absolutely. Thank you. It helps in other situations too. Have you ever overreacted to something somebody has said to you? And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Really, I'm running out of time. And this is kind of an aside. It occurred to me, somebody tells me they're not doing well. As a matter of fact, Al Selgren, most of you know him, and he's gotten some bad news recently. And I thought, how will I respond to that? If you come across as, you're not going to make it. You don't want to do that. First of all, that isn't necessarily true. But, on the other hand, you want to sound compassionate and understanding, and you want to come across that way. But you don't want to come across so much so that you are sounding as if they are going to die. This is more serious. So staying calm, really assessing a situation, ultimately accepting responsibility is so wise and something that we need to do. Now, we may not get all the way through this, but let's give it a try here. Rulers are not exempt from folly. Let's take a look at verses 5 through 7. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. I have seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves on the land. All right, so I don't know about you, but I put together the verse 5 with verse 6. Are those separate thoughts? I mean, clearly they're connected, but I think they are connected in a causal way, a cause and effect kind of way. And what I'm getting at here is I believe that the error that the ruler has done is that he has set people in exalted places that don't belong there. And the people that belong there are in humble places. And what this does is it creates an administration full of folly. It creates an administration that is not probably going to seek justice, avoid oppression, and so, yes, even rulers can be subject to folly. Ultimately, I've seen slaves riding on horses, those that should have been humbled, and this has nothing to do with Jesus' teaching about the humble being exalted. And Peter's statement, humble yourself before God and he will exalt you. This is just talking about in the context of leadership. People in a ruling position, they need to have shown themselves. For example, he mentions rich people here, mentions that in verse 6 at the end. Just because you're rich doesn't mean that you're going to be just. But by having taken care of a lot of resources, you may be in a position to handle more resources. Let's put it this way. Nobody would put me in charge of the budget, federal budget. Nobody would put me there. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. So the natural order is reversed. Why? Because a little fly can make the perfumer's oil stink. And that's what can happen in an entire government. Yeah.
This is a place where the poetry really pops out. Because if you go back and look at these words for rich and for noble, it's a little surprising. It's like the word sense earlier is really the word for heart. There's a different picture that comes if you think not of riches, but capable. And when you think of a noble, you think of someone who is beneficent, people who give, they're very generous. The core word that's traded as prince here in the New American is actually a word that means a person who is generous. And so there's a bigger picture behind this than we sometimes get in the English. What you got here is a guy, perhaps because he has a bad temper, right? We just talked about a ruler who has a problem with his spirit and how to respond to a ruler who has a problem with spirit. Now that ruler who has a problem with spirit is kind of connected to another ruler who has a problem. He has a problem with judgment. And he might be because he has a temper, I don't know. And so then if this then leads to having people in places where they are not capable, that's really the picture. And then the people you put there, instead of slaves, it might be good to read that boys. They're people who are immature. Again, you have to go back to the Hebrew to see what the picture is that's there, and not to argue with translations. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. But the picture you get then is one that's different, and that has a continuity to this whole thread that you've been, very well spelling out for us. And that is that the reason it's important when you're in a position where the temper of the ruler is wrong for you to hold your composure is because you might be the capable person who needs to be, where the government, for the land, needs to have your capacity there. And you need to realize sometimes that doesn't happen because that's the way rulers are sometimes. Now, that's the thing of Ecclesiastes, that's frustrating. It can be, but on the other hand, once we're wise enough to expect that, there's a way to behave because that's true.
All right, yes. The natural order is reversed because of foolishness. And one of the things that I wanted to do is maybe we'll pick up on this Wednesday night. What prompts a ruler to do this? Ed had mentioned a couple of things, but one of the things I want us to take away from it is that we can avoid the things that prompt a ruler. And I think an absence of values, good values and morals, and not sticking to those. And we'll pick up on that Wednesday night. Thank you. Appreciate it.